Episode 256, The Long Game of Advocacy and How to Keep Going. Well, hey there, my friends. Welcome back to the Not Your Average Autism Mom podcast. I am your host, Shannon Urquiola, and I am mom to an amazing young adult named Jordan, who is 29 now. I'm a life and parent coach and mentor to an incredible community of moms, all raising children on the spectrum. And I have walked this autism parenting journey for almost 3 decades now. And I know the mix of love and fear and frustration and hope that comes with it. So, whether your kiddo just got diagnosed or you've been doing this a while, I want you to know that you belong here. And today we're talking about something that every single one of you is doing. Whether you call yourself an advocate or not, you are advocating every day in ways both big and small, sometimes quietly, sometimes loudly, sometimes while you're completely exhausted. And if you've ever thought, I can't keep doing this forever, this episode is for you, because advocacy is not a phase. It's not a season along this journey. It is a lifetime role, and there's no roadmap for how to do it year after year. Now, before we dive in, I want to say one quick thing. Most of our episodes here are around 20 minutes or less because I know how full your days are and I don't take your time lightly. But this topic, there's a lot here and I didn't want to rush it. So this is one of those episodes that will probably go a little bit longer than usual. Not because I wasn't mindful of time, but because there was so much that needed to be said. Advocacy touches every stage of this journey. And before I go any further, I want to be sure to be clear because it's important that you know who I'm talking to when I say advocacy. When I talk about advocacy in this episode, I am talking to moms of speaking autistic children, moms of minimally speaking children, moms of non-speaking children, moms whose children use AAC devices, moms whose children may never be able to advocate for themselves. Autism is a spectrum. Our children's abilities, needs, and future are all different. And there's no one size fits all handbook for this journey. So as you listen today, just take what fits your life and your child and leave the rest. You are included here. All right, now that I'm clear on that, I want to talk about what advocacy actually looks like in real life because it's more than most people think that it is. Most of us think that advocacy means IEP meetings, emails to schools, doctor's appointments, paperwork, phone calls. And yes, those are all part of it. But advocacy is also explaining your child's needs to family members, correcting misinformation from strangers, teaching your child how to ask for help if they're able, teaching siblings why things don't feel fair, deciding when to push and when to let something go. That's not just work. That's constant mental and emotional effort. And when you try to advocate at full intensity all the time for years on end, burnout is not a possibility. It's a predictable outcome. And this is where a really important truth comes in, one that most of us don't hear nearly enough. You cannot advocate the same way at every stage of your child's life. And trying to do that is one of the fastest paths to resentment, exhaustion, and just emotionally shutting down. So, I want to walk through what advocacy actually looks like over time and what it really takes to sustain it. You know, we might as well start at the beginning, right? Those early years, they hit fast and they don't wait for you to catch your breath. You're suddenly advocating for evaluations, diagnoses, therapies, early intervention, insurance approvals. And emotionally, You're grieving. You're scared. You're Googling at 2 a.m. when everyone else in the house is asleep. You're learning a whole new language that you never asked to learn. You're trying to plan for a future that you don't even recognize yet. But the truth is, you don't need to know everything right now. You just need to know what helps today. And so these are some things to remember for that early stage. Advocate for what matters right now, not everything that might matter someday. Ask yourself, what helps my child this month? Let professionals guide you, but don't feel pressured to become one overnight. In those early years, many moms burn themselves out trying to see 10 years down the road when you're barely getting through the week. So you think if we just understand everything that you'll feel more in control. But clarity doesn't come from knowing it all. It comes from taking the next right step. This journey unfolds in chapters, not all at once. And you are allowed to learn as you go. You don't need the whole roadmap on day one. Now, as our kids get older and are transitioning to school age years, advocacy doesn't disappear. It just gets louder and more visible. You're advocating for IEPs and accommodations, classroom supports, behavioral supports, sensory needs, social struggles, discipline that doesn't punish their disability. You're advocating for safety and dignity. You're emailing, you're having meetings, you're following up, you're documenting, you're repeating yourself over and over again. And this is especially true when your child can't come home and tell you how their day was. So, for many moms, especially those with non speaking children or limited speaking children, this is where advocacy becomes deeply protective. For many of our kids, there's no after school recap, right? They can't say things like, that scared me, or I was overwhelmed, or they didn't understand me. So instead, you become the translator. You start noticing patterns. You watch behavior change. You read between the lines. You ask questions that feel uncomfortable because you're the only one who will. That is advocacy. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, but it's absolutely essential. And here's where a lot of moms get exhausted. When your child can't tell you what happened, it can feel like every single moment matters. Like if you don't push on everything, something important might get missed. So what do? You fight all of it. Every email, every decision, every concern. And over time, that constant intensity takes a toll. So, what helps at this stage is learning to be intentional with your advocacy. Not every issue needs escalation. Not every concern requires a formal meeting. And not every moment has to become a battle. Save your strongest advocacy for the things that truly matter: safety, dignity, access. And I want you to hear this. Choosing your battles is not giving up. It's not being passive, and it's not failing your child. It's being strategic so that you can keep showing up when it really counts. And then next, we move into a stage that feels different in a quieter, heavier way: middle school and high school. And now you're not just advocating for supports anymore. You're advocating for your child's whole kind of inner world, right? You're thinking about mental health, anxiety, burnout, belonging, flexibility, what comes next, and whether your child believes they are truly okay just as they are. And now more than ever, your child likely feels the difference between them and their peers. And for some kids, this is when self-advocacy starts to take shape. They begin to name what helps. They might speak up. For other kids, that shift never really comes. They still need you to be their voice. And both experiences are valid. But this is where a lot of messaging around advocacy starts to shift, sometimes in ways that don't fit every family. One of the ways that moms get worn down in this stage is by trying to control outcomes. You want the right friend group, the right classroom, the right teacher, the right path after graduation. But advocacy in these years isn't about forcing a certain result. It's about helping your child build the skills to get through hard moments, whatever that looks like for them. That might mean learning how to recover after a tough day, helping them regulate emotions, teaching them or modeling for them what support actually looks and feels like, or continuing to be the one who notices, explains, and protects. This stage asks for us to think long term, not how do I fix this, but how do I help them live with this and still manage day to day and still feel good. When self-advocacy is possible, you might slowly shift from I advocate for you to I'm advocating with you. And so what do I mean by that? Well, that might look like helping your child name their needs, right? What does that look like for them? And a lot of times they'll be sitting in IEP meetings at this point, practicing asking for support, sitting beside them in those meetings, encouraging them to speak up. This is where advocacy becomes teaching, not just defending. But I also want to pause here because this is part of the conversation that doesn't always get enough space. Because when we talk about advocacy shifting as our kids get older, I want to be really clear about something. Not all autistic children can advocate for themselves, and many never will in the ways that people typically picture. Some of our kids, like I said, they're non-speaking or limited speaking, right? Maybe they have apraxia or processing delays. Maybe they become overwhelmed or shut down in stressful situations, and sitting in an IEP meeting would be a stressful situation for them. Maybe they can't explain their fear or their confusion or, their anything with their words. And if that's your child, I want you to know this. You are not behind. You are not doing advocacy wrong. Your role just doesn't expire, right? Advocacy is not one size fits all. There's no handbook that applies to every child or family. So for many families, advocating with your child does not mean handing over the microphone. It means being their interpreter, being their historian of all the things, being their steady voice. You're still explaining what helps, what hurts, what behaviors mean. So your role doesn't shrink. It just changes shape. And for many families, that advocacy shows up most clearly through behavior. For many children, especially non-speaking or limited speaking kids, behavior is communication, right? They can't say all those things. They can't say, I don't understand what's happening. I'm confused. I need help. So their body speaks. And you advocate by noticing those changes in behavior that signal distress, speaking up when something doesn't feel right, even if it, tests what normal is. Refusing to minimize your instincts because your instincts matter. And this is advocacy at its deepest level. They can't tell you that they're being ignored or they're being rushed or they're being misunderstood or overwhelmed. So you have to watch for patterns instead of waiting for explanations. You have to ask the questions that other people aren't asking. You have to request support based on function, not just academics. You have to ask, what is this telling us? Instead of asking, how do we stop this? So you're the voice that fills the gaps that others don't see. There's a lot of messaging out there that says the goal is independence. But independence looks different for every autistic person. For some families, advocacy never becomes self-advocacy. Decision making is shared or supported. Guardianship or long-term caregiving is part of the picture, right? And that doesn't mean that your child has failed. It doesn't mean that you've done something wrong. Advocacy is not about creating a certain outcome. It's about protecting their dignity and their safety and their quality of life. Full stop. And all of that brings us to something that, really matters in advocacy. No matter your child's communication style, even when our children can't communicate in typical ways, advocacy still includes presuming understanding, explaining what's happening, even if we're not sure how much they'll process, talking to them, not just about them. And I'm super big on this, especially if your child is in an IEP meeting. I never want the team to sit and talk about them like they're not in the room, including them in decisions in whatever ways they can participate. Advocacy isn't loud speeches. Sometimes it's just quiet respect. Advocacy also doesn't just happen in schools or doctor's offices or meetings. It happens inside your home. Let's talk about siblings. Siblings notice things often before you even realize it. They notice the uneven attention, the different expectations, the exceptions being made, the schedules and plans changing. And depending on their age, they don't always understand why. So you might, have to explain things in different ways. Your sibling's brain works differently and they need more help in certain areas. That doesn't mean that you matter less. It means I just, as mom, have to respond to different needs. And the truth is, sometimes that explanation still doesn't feel good to them. They might nod and walk away, and they might come back later with frustration or resentment or questions that catch you off guard. And that doesn't mean that you handled it wrong. It means this is hard for everyone. And this gets even more complicated when the autistic sibling is non-speaking. You may be advocating to a sibling who wonders, why can't they just tell us what they want? Why do they get so much help? Why does everything seem to revolve around them? And those questions can sting because they're honest. Kids are honest. And in those moments, you might have to say something similar. Their brain and body don't communicate the same way yours does. That means we have to help them translate things, right? What they need, what they're feeling, what's overwhelming. It's not about fairness. It's about making sure everyone gets what they actually need to be okay. And even then, your other child may still struggle with it. And that doesn't mean they lack empathy. It means they're a child or a teenager trying to make sense of a family dynamic that's complicated and emotional. And here's another part that doesn't get talked about enough. When you're advocating inside your family, you're holding multiple truths at the same time. You're protecting one child while trying not to emotionally lose another, while managing your own guilt and worry and exhaustion. That's advocacy too. You're advocating for understanding, for honesty, for space for everyone's feelings, even the uncomfortable ones. And that kind of advocacy takes just as much care and compassion as anything that you do outside of your home. And then we get to the stage that no one really prepares us for, adulthood. Somewhere along the way, there's this quiet expectation that things are supposed to ease up, that once your child's grown, advocacy should taper off. But for many families like mine, the opposite happens. You're now advocating for doctors who don't understand autism, for medical appointments where you're still explaining your child from the beginning, guardianship, supported decision making, employment supports, housing options, and whether your child truly belongs in their community. And the systems, they're hard to navigate, even on your best days. They are complicated and confusing and often exhausting just to figure out. And if your child is non-speaking or needs significant support, this stage feels even harder because your role doesn't shift the way people said it would. And if your advocacy never fully transitions, that's not failure. It's not something you did wrong. It's a reality for many families. Independence doesn't look the same for every autistic adult. And advocacy at this stage isn't about hitting milestones or checking boxes. It's about quality of life. And one of the biggest ways that moms get drained here is by believing that they should be done advocating by now. Like they missed a handoff point somewhere along the way. But adulthood advocacy isn't about stepping away. It's about finding ways to carry it that don't require you to hold everything in your head all the time. So, what does that mean? Well, it might mean putting systems in place, writing things down, asking for help, looping in other professionals, or letting someone else carry part of it for you. Because this was never meant to be a solo job. And needing support at this stage doesn't mean you're tired because you're weak. It means the work is real and it's ongoing and it's demanding. Which that brings me to the part of advocacy that we don't talk about enough. How to keep going without losing yourself. If your child cannot advocate for themselves, your role is ongoing in different ways, like we've talked about. You're often the one watching for the signs that other people miss, the one speaking when they can't, the one staying aware because you know what can get overlooked. That's why advocacy can't be lived at full speed all the time. This isn't about pushing harder. It's about lasting longer. And not because you don't care, but because this is a long road. And so what helps is learning how to move in and out of advocacy in a way that's sustainable. So that means being aware of your own limits, having boundaries around what you take on, giving yourself time to recover, and allowing support to be part of the big picture. You are allowed to rest between battles. You are allowed to say, nope, not today. You are allowed to ask for help. You're allowed to step back when you need to. Because parents who are constantly in fight mode don't get relief, and exhaustion helps no one. What your child needs most is a parent who can keep showing up again and again. And before I wrap up, I just want to say this. I really hope this episode gave you something you needed today. Maybe that was a new perspective, maybe a sense of relief, maybe just the reminder that you're not doing this wrong. Because the truth is, you are doing better than you give yourself credit for. Advocacy doesn't always look heroic or obvious, but it shows up in 100 quiet ways. And you're doing work that like that every single day. And for my moms that I work with, I want you to know I've added a downloadable advocacy check-in worksheet to the files section in the village too. It's just a simple resource that so that you can pause and reflect on where you're spending your time and energy and remind yourself of what's actually working, because advocacy can quietly drain you when you don't stop to check in. And before we close, I want to leave you with something that I'd like you to reflect on. What's been your biggest advocacy win so far? Leave me a comment in the comment section, or if you're one of the moms I work with, share it inside of the village, because let's celebrate those. Because I know this to be true. You have had them. Even if no one clapped, even if they felt small, even if they happened behind the scenes. And if you've been here a while, you know this about me. I believe all of it matters. The big wins, the quiet ones, the seen and the unseen, all of those count. And every week I'm here because I know how hard this can be. And I want you to know that you are never walking this road alone. And if you ever want to go deeper and connect with other amazing moms who just get it, I invite you to join us inside our private membership, where real conversations and real coaching and support and understanding are waiting for you. And please, if this episode helped you, breathe a little easier or reminded you that you're doing better than you think, share it with another mom who might need that reminder today. Until next week, and above all, remember, you, mama, are doing amazing at this mom thing.